today I wanted to take a step back. For example, my name is Daniel Gracias,
And I'm Bryce Dexter.
and we're actually partners in a jewelry store. We met at a while we were working together in Washington D.C. for the Tiny Jewel Box. We I want to say that we kind of hit it off from the time we met somewhat. It was a little rocky start just because you were hiring me
Mhm.
and I didn't know how much I could
Right.
be myself around you.
Yeah. Feeling it out personality wise. Yeah.
Personality wise, because
Yeah.
I love joking around. Like that's my jam.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of perceived as maybe a little bit what's the word? Immature.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like, you never really know if because it's a shop mentality, right? People talk about that
Well,
and
it
throw
is to
that word
me.
around, and it can be,
Yeah, it can be.
and I feel like there are a lot of people, artists especially, who can be a little more sensitive than others,
The way I always looked at it is like you can't take life too seriously.
Right.
It's too short.
Hmm.
It's too short to be grumpy. That being said, I do know what I'm doing. Like I've been doing this job for the last 20 years. I'm very happy to be a jeweler. I grew up around it. In, on my side of things, I like to fabricate, make things, and think things out. So for me, it's always a challenge to like put together a thought or get an idea from a client and then take their ideas, mix it in with a little bit of style, and we come up with something unique.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, you're definitely more like the engineering side of
I
like
like
and design.
I like
obviously.
structural.
Yeah. Because when we first met and you started talking, it was like you already had, famous artists and jewelers that, you'd studied their work a little bit. You knew their body of work.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you were like, what did you think about this artist? And what do you think about this artist? And I was like, I don't know, man. Like it's like I'm a diamond setter and like I love hand engraving, and
Right,
so like
right.
I was more on the lines of like I had learned about technique, and I was still in that process of learning how to do things and not really fully able to appreciate the way things were actually put together, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah.
because by the time that, you and I met, I had a little bit of fabrication experience, but they really just utilized me at that point as doing like repair work and stone setting. And that was kind of it. And then you came in, and then you came from multiple different studio backgrounds where you had to go from like nothing. So you had made everything by hand,
Yeah.
including alloying your own metal.
I'm pretty old, so there weren't 3D printers back then.
Right. But I mean, like to the point where you're alloying everything. Like
Yeah.
I had never been part of a shop or even introduced to any shop other than people that were doing granulation. Nobody ever alloyed their own metal from like 24
Right.
karat that I knew of.
Right.
They always just ordered it as
Already made.
Yeah, exactly.
In stock.
Because you could, it's
Yeah.
and today, you can order whatever casting or rolling grain you want. That's whatever carat you want.
Oh yeah, and
But-
there's a ton of guys on YouTube that will make a piece of jewelry, and the reason you're right, I have studied under a lot of people. One of my favorite people was Mr. Chu. I mean, that guy, he's a Korean originally. Was an engineer in Korea. Came to the United States, became a jeweler. He used to work at Dominion Jewelers, which that place is also like wow. I enjoyed my time there a lot. But Mr. Chu, his thing was you do things the old way. So when I first started working with him, he hands me this giant Home Depot hammer, and he's like, "Hey man, go ahead and make me a shank." I'm like, "Okay, but what am I doing with this thing?" He's like, "Well, here's the anvil. You're gonna need it. Here's some grain. Go ahead and melt it." And I'm looking at him like, "What are you talking about? It's so much easier to get a three by three piece of stock that's 60 millimeters long, and from there I could just file it away." He's like, "That's incredibly wasteful." But he comes from that time.
Right.
Korea was not exactly it isn't what it is today
Right.
when he was growing up.
Yeah.
So their mentality has always been,
This is before their tech boom,
yes,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a different type of economy.
yeah, he's like in his 70s nowadays.
Yeah.
So I think I hope I didn't.
He won't listen to this. It's fine.
Probably not. And good luck finding this. No, but that was their mentality back then. It's
Yeah.
like you save everything. You try to keep everything as clean as possible. And that was so unique to what I had experienced before. Like, don't get me wrong. I also studied under this guy, John Caro, who was like a tech god. This guy was into everything. We took I guess it was just at the time it was simply just a an engraver,
Mhm.
like a computer run engraver.
Okay.
You had to run it through DOS, you know,
Nice.
but he was sure that you could use it more of like almost like a router CNC,
Okay.
but it ran on air.
Oh.
Dude, we cut not ivory, what is that black stuff? Onyx with
Oh,
it,
okay.
and made letters where you had little diamonds floating around. But that was very technical work, you know.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
with him teaching me that, and Mr. Chu's real
Right.
know-how of how to like structurally make something.
Yeah. And so you basically, your timeline just between those two guys,
Yeah.
you started with Caro,
Yes.
right? So you
Yes,
started
yes.
with like this like technical,
Right.
like,
That's where I learned how to do CAD.
yeah.
You know,
And this was in the 90s, right? Like
This
when
was
CAD
late
was
90s, yeah.
just like
Brand new.
becoming into the jewelry industry.
yes. Look
Yeah.
up Form Z, dude. That's
Mhm.
it was so difficult for me to understand it. He's also the reason why I bought my first computer. I was like, this is
Oh, wow.
amazing. Like, yeah.
That's-
He's like, you need to get into this. Like
Yeah.
CNC is where the future is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Little did he know about 3D printers, right?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. That just
Yeah.
flipped everything on its head. But so you came from kind of almost a similar situation to like me, where it's like I was used to just CADing everything
Right.
and having everything done, cast,
Sort of, yeah.
and then, given
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
And having to actually plan things out still. But yeah, because when I started working with you, even at Tiny Jewel Box, they still preferred to do the order the stock, right? And
yeah.
and they could charge enough money.
Yep.
Because they were
Stock is expensive.
milled stock. Like now that we run
Yeah.
our own studio, it is incredible how much money you can save
Oh,
just
yeah.
by, melting something down and milling it out yourself.
Or just keeping your area clean and remelting the
Yeah,
material.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, when we were at Tiny Jewel Box, it was like that was still the way they did things, was ordering stock that was already pre-milled, and then that was it. And even when you came in, because that was already how we were doing things, you were like, that's fine. Like, we'll just continue to do things the way you guys are doing it if that's how you want to do it. You don't want to
I'm
step on
pretty
any toes.
easygoing, Yeah.
But then when we started working together, you're explaining how Mr. Chu, kind of like threw a wrench in like what you were used to. And like, that's kind of how what happened to me when I started working with you solo. It was
Yeah.
like, you did the same exact thing. We bought a Home Depot hammer. We have that giant ball peen hammer.
Yep.
At the studio. And we bought a
Railroad track.
a railroad track that we're using as an anvil.
And it works great.
It works fantastic.
Do not waste your money on like specified tools. It's just
Yeah, I mean, if you're
doesn't
into
make any
it
sense.
and you're like collect,
a collector, yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead and get yourself a very nice anvil.
Yeah, you worked with the guy that collected anvils, right?
Yeah. He runs a jewelry school in Washington D.C.
Which you taught at.
Yeah. I taught a few classes there, and his collection of anvils and hammers was just out of this world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I used his studio for an enamel project that I had once at the
Mhm.
Tiny Jewel Box. That was a black pearl or white pearl on a black enamel.
That's what it was.
Right. And I was impressed. Like, I've never seen a bigger collection of anvils in my life.
Yeah.
And some of them were really pretty.
Oh, they're gorgeous. And he shops, he's on eBay every day looking for vintage.
So am
Stuff.
I. Like, I really want a CNC machine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, our search history is a little bit different than his.
A little bit.
But
A little bit.
But yeah, I mean, I just remember walking in there and he was like, "Oh yeah, I just drove my truck up to New Jersey and found this, 1800s anvil that's, capped with like high carbon steel,
Nice.
and he's like, I only picked it up for $1,200, and
Oh
I was like,
God.
what? And it's like, yeah, he's like, and the guy like I got a custom, tree stump where it's like inset into the tree stump. And this guy did this custom like iron forged frame for the stump. And like,
Did you get to see it?
yeah, yeah.
So when you saw it, did it take you back to your old days? Because you
Yeah,
have a pretty start, like a pretty interesting
yeah,
jewelry start.
yeah. I mean, yeah, well, so I started when I was 15 and I was just looking for like a paper route job
Right. Right.
at the time.
Yeah.
And my mom actually found an ad in the newspaper for just like a shopkeep, basically. They
Nice.
wanted an engraver. I'm putting it in quotes.
Right.
And I say engraver because now obviously like we do hand engraving and laser engraving and like all this stuff. But what they really wanted was somebody to use what we call a pantograph engraving machine, which is what we now have at the studio.
But that's more of a display thing.
Exactly. And so they had one in the back, and it was just
cool.
a standalone setup, and they engraved baby cups and picture frames and plaques and awards and all that stuff, little charms.
So they didn't even use like a computerized.
No, I grew up on that, like just the brass stencils.
I mean, we did too, I guess.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everything after we got that air run engraver, yeah, all right. I had to use DOS, but that was easy to pick up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they had us do, and they still have it.
I believe it. I mean, those things are never going to rust.
Yeah, no, they last forever.
Yeah.
And as long as you keep everything tidy, it's fine. And I was full time there basically, like over the summers,
right?
And it started as an after school thing. Obviously, I was 15 years old, sophomore in high school, and I just started working there over after school, and then I'd work there full time on the summers, and that's when I met.
That's fun.
Yeah, that's when I met a jeweler who turns out you knew as well, James Wright.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and I met a jeweler, and he kind of
James was a trip.
Yeah, but he kind of got me into it. He was the first person to like take a piece of jewelry and be like, "Here, go polish this."
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and so
up until that point, what were you doing around the shop? Just cleaning. I
was washing all the cases. I was vacuuming, sweeping, cleaning the bathrooms.
Like, what my dad used to have me do.
And it was like but I didn't really get into it to be a jeweler. I didn't think I was going to be a jeweler when I got into this already.
So when did you make that decision?
I was interested in like auto body and like fixing dents, fabrication, and painting. Like I really wanted to like get into the automotive industry at first. Yeah. And so
I'm assuming that you also had an airbrush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd do custom like license plate stuff.
No kidding.
Yeah, for people. And
Salt Life.
Right, yeah. Deer antlers.
Deer antlers.
And like, yeah, it was just and James was the first person that actually gave me a piece of jewelry to work on. And then he actually took me through the process of making a full ring from start to finish. So it went from like carving the actual wax.
Okay.
Casting it myself in silver.
Yeah.
Casting it myself, cleaning it up, setting the stones, and then actually polishing it. And that was like the full thing. And by that point, I was just like, I like this.
Yeah.
I got such like fulfillment out of it. Creating something tangible. And I was like, well, ask him. Obviously, I spent a ton of time with him because I was basically just always walking around the store, and it was a small store. And we would go to lunch together and like just, shoot the shit. Sorry for cursing. But
it's all right.
But I learned that he went to Old Dominion in Norfolk, and he studied under this teacher, Diane, and she was still there. Like he had studied from her, and turns out she was still teaching the jewelry program at Old Dominion. Yeah.
How many years apart were you guys?
Oh my gosh. Probably 20.
Whoa.
Yeah, probably about 20 years. Because I was, like I said, I was 15, and he was either in his early 30s or mid 30s by the time I met him.
So what you're saying is that it's her fault.
No,
I'm just
because
kidding.
that's the thing, right? So I was like, oh, I'm definitely, you know what? That's what I'll do. I
Yeah.
like what I'm doing. And, the owners of the store kind of became, I obviously had a dad who was around,
Right,
but they
right,
also
right.
became like father figures. It was kind of like one of those things where it was like we became like a small family. Um, and so I decided, I was like, you know what? Why not? Like, I'll go get a degree. If I can get a college degree and it be jewelry,
Right.
like
That's the perfect combination.
exactly. And, so then I went to college, and that was kind of where everything like got tilted on its side,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because when I went, they gave elective priority. So priority for any electives that you wanted to do to the like juniors and seniors.
Right. They always do that. Right.
Exactly. And so I, being a bright-eyed freshman, was like, you know what? Like, that's fine. I'll do like woodworking. And so I did woodworking for a semester, and then I realized that like the art field in
Yeah.
college
Uh-huh.
is
Saturated.
it's saturated, but it's so time consuming.
Yes, it is.
It's like incredibly time consuming. And so because I remember going into that woodworking class, and there was a guy in there who was a junior,
Mm-hmm.
and you could tell that he'd already been there for 4 semesters, because he basically walked into that class and just started using everything in the class. Like he kind of like he did the programs, he did all that stuff, and it just kind of was so eye-opening to me, because I was like, oh, he's familiarizing himself with everything, and he's utilizing every single thing that the studio is providing him. But it's also just he knows he's allowed access to everything.
Right.
Whereas me coming in fresh, I'm like, I don't want to touch
You're a
anything
little
and break
timid.
it.
Right.
You're
gonna have a hard time
Um,
breaking a mill though.
well, yeah, but there's also like wood lathes, stuff like that you
Yeah,
actually need
yeah,
training
yeah.
on.
That's true.
And so he's just going around making all this cool stuff, and I'm sitting there with like a wood chisel and a hammer, just trying to like, carve something out of wood, and this guy's making furniture,
Right.
like turned furniture and stuff.
That spiked your interest in it?
Yeah, that's why my interest in woodworking too,
Yeah,
which
'cause I know
later
that
became a hobby.
that's why I mentioned that, because I
Yeah.
know that you've always enjoyed working with wood.
Yeah, yeah, and that became a hobby later after I left college. But yeah, and so I was like, you know what? Why? That's fine. I'll do this woodworking thing, and then I took a drawing course, and tried to fill my electives up.
What
but
kind of
tried
drawing
to.
courses did you take?
I had to start with 101. So it was
I know,
just.
but what I mean is like
Mhm.
what was that?
So it was a lot of. It was mostly just shading and perspective study.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant
Like,
like a technical drawing
No,
course.
no, I'm talking about just like it was
Oh,
literally just
gotcha.
charcoal and pencil.
I
Like,
got
that
it.
was
I
it.
got it. So like
And
drawing
so
one.
exactly. And so it was entry level stuff. But with that too opened my eyes, because that was another continuation of like the woodworking, right? Where
Yeah.
it was like, okay, you have a 3 or 6 hour long class, right? And then after that, you still have to go to the quad, pick a thing to draw,
Yeah.
a subject to draw, and then sit there for the next 3 hours and draw as well, and that was like an everyday thing. So I was like, man, it's a lot of work, and especially the drawing part at the time, doing
Yeah.
subjects that I really wasn't interested in.
Yeah.
You know, in retrospect, everything helps,
Yeah, it
right?
does.
But at the time, 19 years old, I'm like, I
Very
don't want to.
impatient.
Yeah, I don't want
Yeah.
to draw fruit. Like,
Yeah.
and like again, in retrospect,
Yeah, retrospect is always a killer,
I know
right?
exactly why they have you do all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But so
So
then I realized, so then I needed money. Okay. So what happened was I needed to pay rent
yeah.
because I was living with some friends, and my parents had just split.
Wait, you didn't stay in the
In the dorms?
in the
No, no.
dorms?
I wanted to get out of the dorms as soon as possible.
Why?
Like,
I mean, don't get me wrong. My kids also don't want to be in the dorms,
Yeah.
and they want it out as soon
Yeah,
as
yeah,
possible. But I was walking around like, this is not bad.
oh, I know. Again, in retrospect, right? No, the dorms were just, they were so like confining, I guess, like in terms of like you just got your freedom
It is a
as
small
an
space,
adult.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're a young adult, just got your freedom. There's a lot of rules and regulations that you have to follow, and there was just so much more freedom with like living off campus.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, granted, you didn't have like the meal plans and stuff like that you could that came with it, but you know, I already had 2 other roommates,
You
so
can
we had
keep your
3
meal
guys.
plan nowadays.
You know, yeah, exactly. So now, you know, you can do that, but back then it was like if you wanted to be in the dorms, you needed to pay extra.
Uh-huh.
You know, or you can just do an add-on for your meal plans. So, anyways, I had moved off campus after the first semester because ODU is a public university, so they have kids from off campus come and you know, and they commute, so you don't have to stay
Right.
on campus for your first full year.
Right.
And so, a buddy of mine, Ryan, his dad bought a house in
And then you
Norfolk,
moved in with them.
and we moved in with them
So
and a
this
couple other guys. Yeah,
This immediately precipitated the need for money.
exactly.
And that's how.
Yeah, and that's kind of how because you can't fast foot your way through a
No.
through
You can't.
a rental property.
As I'm aware.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I remember, like I said, my parents had just split up, so they're separated and they're trying to figure their own stuff out.
Mhm.
And so I didn't have any kind of like financial help coming to me. So I realized, like, okay, I need to get a job.
This explains the kayak.
Yeah, right. Sorry, son. Let me make it up to you. So, you know, it was just, yeah, a need for money. And so I started working at a Chinese restaurant.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
yeah. Well, that's
So-
not true. I worked at a department store first. I worked at Abercrombie first.
Yeah.
And it wasn't paying
I
anything.
feel like you were
and-
a perfect fit for Abercrombie, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
With or without a shirt?
yeah, with a shirt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I was a model, not that kind of model. And I didn't like it. You know, it was like the culture there. It was just, you know, it was like
It's
lazy
retail.
and just, yeah, exactly. Obviously.
Yeah.
And it's not even like real
Terrible.
retail. You
No,
know what I
it's
mean? Like
not.
you're not selling anything. You're just,
No. But like what I mean, so there's 2 types of retail. There's like selling jewelry
Mhm.
where you have to know the subject. You have to be,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you have to be informed about what it
Mhm.
is that you're pushing around.
Mhm.
And then there's retail, right? Like
Yeah.
selling
shirts and
shirts at
clothing and
Bebes or BBs, whatever it's
BB.
called.
Lululemon.
Lululemon, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that there's anything wrong with that kind of work, you
No.
know, but it's not exactly,
Technical.
it's not like selling a Paddock
Right.
or a, you
Yeah.
know,
A Paddock or like a Cartier or like, yeah, exactly. Or yeah, IWC.
right,
mean-
right.
There's no, yeah, you don't need to know
You don't.
what you're selling.
No, but it helps.
Exactly.
So from there is where you
Yeah.
started working, because I love
So,
that you
yeah.
worked at
Chinese restaurant
no,
or Williamsburg.
Williamsburg.
Yeah.
I
So
still
that all
haven't-
leads into it.
I've never been into Williamsburg to this day.
You still haven't been?
No, bro, it just doesn't call my attention like
No,
that.
it's fair. I completely understand why.
I love history. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
and that's what. This is also why we wanted to do this podcast because I'm all into it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the era. If you guys have been, if you bumped into this podcast already, we've already done like a introduction of the subject, but we forgot to do an introduction of ourselves.
Yes.
So that's why we're going back a step. But I
Yeah.
love that stuff.
Yeah.
But just walking around with people pretending, did they make you pretend?
No. So here's the deal with Williamsburg, and this is so just to put it into context. After my sophomore year in college, I needed money, but I also wanted to do something in jewelry. Like I realized I felt like I was just wasting my time
Yeah.
because I'd gone through 2 years of school and I hadn't touched a single piece of jewelry at
Oh,
this
boy.
point. Right. And it was like I was
It's
getting
just drawing and
just drawing, woodworking, and then trying to fill my time basically
boy.
with stuff. So and I needed to make money. And so I was like, you know what? Like I got to do something.
right.
And I was with a girlfriend of mine at the time, and we had just gone to Colonial Williamsburg. You know, like why not? You know, it's a date.
Yeah.
And so we went up there, and I'd walked into the silversmith shop because we bought tickets, and I walked into the silversmith, and you know, it was actually her who was like, "Why don't you apply for a job here?" Like, you know, and I was like, "Well, it's like an hour and a half away."
From ODU.
From Norfolk, because it's Williamsburg, you know, and I had to cross the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, which gets backed up. Like there were some days that I worked there because I did end up working there. some days I worked there where I had 4 hours of traffic in one direction.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And so
I would have just turned around and been like, "Hey, I can't make it today."
yeah, well, you can't because you're on a bridge.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I had no choice, and this bridge is,
Oh,
a mile long. So it's like if it's backed up, you're stuck on a bridge, and there's
Yikes.
nowhere to go. So I started working at this place because I went in, I talked to at the time the senior journeyman, he was like the second down from the master at the shop, and he said, "Oh yeah, we have an apprentice right now, but why don't you? Here's our card. Email the master of the shop and see what he says." And it turns out that this apprentice had just ghosted. This kid had just like they don't know where he went.
Smart man.
Probably to this day, right? Probably to this day they have no idea where this guy went.
Oh man.
So I emailed him. He was like, "Yeah, our apprentice hasn't shown up for a couple weeks now. Like we're still trying to figure it out." And he's like, "Why don't you email you back?" I emailed him back again, and then I finally got to the point where he was like, "Why don't you come in and we'll do like a mini bench test or whatever."
Right.
I was like, "Okay, fine." So I did that, passed, everything was cool. They started me out. So in Williamsburg, if you're working in one of the ticketed areas, which is where you actually have to pay for a ticket to get in, because you can go to the store where they sell all the things that the silversmith made for free. Like you can buy stuff for free, in Williamsburg, right? But if you want to actually learn about the trades, and then you need to have a ticket, and that's when they make you wear the costume.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the tradespeople, so the gunsmith, silversmith, blacksmith, now they have an engraving shop there, the milliner, all those places, they aren't paid to act. Like they're paid to actually make.
So you could show up in jeans.
No.
Okay.
You still got to show up. No, you still got to show up in the outfit, because it's supposed to make it. You're supposed to have like the client or the customer is supposed to feel, like you're in old times. But they're actually making stuff the way they would have back then, and they are supposed to produce a product at the end of the day, right? So for silversmiths, that was trade jewelry. So like brooches, charms, like anything that you could like pin onto a vest, like or use as currency.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
And they traded with the Native Americans using like familiar animal effigies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there'd be like otters and foxes and like different, animals in nature. And so what you do is I'd basically have a sheet of metal that was hammered out, and they made little copper masterpieces, and you just trace with a scribe the little copper template, and then you'd saw that piece out of silver. And so I'd make 120 of these things a week.
Wait, you didn't like chase it?
No, we didn't. No. So then what we'd do is I'd make 120 of these things a week, and then I'd pass them all to the hand engraver, and then she'd go through and actually like do her chasing or hand engraving on all the pieces and do like whatever wriggle cut, stuff. And it was just quick.
Is it chasing? I don't think it's called chasing. So what I would do, I don't know. I've been at this for a while, but what my dad would do, or what he would sell sometimes, is he would sell like different shapes, like hearts, and I would cut them out. Sort of. I would trace the pattern onto a sheet, like you were talking about, that was set into a piece of pitch. Then I would give it a more of a form, or I would kind of, I'm like 15 when I'm doing this.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm just hammering it in, making it more 3D-ish, flipping that around, giving it more of a contours and detail. Yeah, is that what it's called? That's chasing, right?
Absolutely.
It's not. So repoussé is what?
It's both. It's chasing and repoussé.
They're both the same
it's
thing.
Like it's a combination of the two things that.
Right. So that's what I was doing, like when I was learning.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's the kind of stuff you would. And
so
I would saw it out, and I would put like a backing.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So this was like literally just flat charms, and then some of them we would put a dome on. Yeah. But that was just using. Oh, there's a cricket on the floor. There was a giant giant stump, like wood stump with a bunch of different depressions, carved out into it. And then we just take the mallet and just.
That's exactly what he had going on.
Yeah.
But
and that's what we would do.
He was also a little bit of a tinkerer. So we also had like really makeshift casting machines.
Yeah.
That I don't know. He just didn't want to buy like anything too expensive. Again, he grew up in El Salvador. He had a jewelry store in El Salvador. He always
Yeah.
put things together himself. So he put this arm thing together with a chain and a big spring, and he's like, "It works. It's fine. Just put it in a drum. It won't spill.
Wow.
Just be careful." That
Okay.
was my dad. So I've always grown up around people that are always trying to put things together, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Well, it shows.
It explains a lot, right?
It shows. I mean, yeah. And yeah, so like we would just make charms. I made charms.
Interesting.
The other two apprentices that were there who were
Yeah.
full-time apprentices, because I'm part-time. At this point when I'm getting started, I'm not paid.
Oh,
I'm unpaid.
that's
Uh,
illegal.
Well, I'm also studying, but yeah, so I'm technically a student, right? And so they have these two full-time apprentices who are fully paid employees for the foundation, and they took classes in chasing and repoussé.
Oh,
So they're
cool.
doing all that stuff. They're learning how to do chasing. They're learning all of that, and they're also
So are they
making.
learning it from the shop themselves, or are they at ODU learning with you?
So one of them actually graduated from ODU,
Oh, okay.
right? Which also continued my goal to stay with like college at this point, because I went back because this was a summer job, right?
Yeah.
Just at the end of the summer.
What do you mean he continued with your goal?
So I wanted to get a degree in fine art
Oh,
with
I
an
see.
emphasis in metalsmithing. Like that was my goal,
I
right?
gotcha.
To leave college with an art degree.
I gotcha.
When I entered into this whole thing. And so she had graduated from this. And so she was like, yeah, I studied under Diane, same instructor as
Is that
James.
the lady whose ring we made?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I studied under Diane, same instructor as James. And I was like, yeah. Like I know all this. Like this is what I'm trying to do. And so I'm there, I'm learning, I'm commuting, and finally the next semester hits, and I'm still not able to get into a jewelry course. And at this point, it's my first semester of my junior year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I'm still hurting for money. They're not paying me. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go back work at the Chinese restaurant. And so I start working at the Chinese restaurant. Like all my free time is taken up.
I
by
don't know
this.
why I thought that you had worked at that Williamsburg for the entire 4 years you were in college.
No.
That would have been.
No.
That's what I thought you were doing.
So what happened was I went back the next summer. So they actually called me in the spring of what would be 2010, I believe. And they called me back and said, hey, we got a grant from one of our donors for like $15,000. And they said, we'll use that money to pay you this time. We want you to come back. And so I was like, that's fine. And so I came back the next summer, and that's when I started working like full time. I ended up taking a break from school and working at Williamsburg full time. And this is the point where like everything kind of took off, where like I made a bowl, so I actually like poured my own ingot.
What kind of bowl?
Yeah. It's silver, so can only use a lighter.
Hand.
Yeah. But it was just like it was called a James King bowl, and it had a scalloped edge.
Oh, that's cool.
That was pierced around the rim, and it was a little like silver like rectangular wire base.
Are you still into that kind of stuff?
And so, I mean, no. I mean, I like it, obviously,
Yeah.
I have an appreciation for it. But they're able to charge enough money for stuff like that down there, So it's like, while I have an appreciation for how it's made and I can do it, it's not necessarily something that I think I would do outside of that scenario.
I have an appreciation for that stuff. Like, they have a whole silver room at the Hillwood Estates.
Mhm.
You should go check them out.
That's that definitely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
yeah.
And it's just stuff from England, really all over the place.
Yeah.
Just things that Mary Post collected, I suppose.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
beautiful pieces, dude. Like the chasing and repoussé on some of this stuff is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, having like we went to Europe for a little bit and going to some of these like museums and stuff like that. Yeah. Just seeing because it's the same thing, it's just these like such ornate
Yeah.
pieces, and they're all made by hand because it's like you're not going to reproduce the same thing over and over and over again. And you could, like for example, in Williamsburg, all the spouts and handles for their teapots, and in some cases the feet, were cast. And so they just make a masterpiece
Uh-huh.
out of wood first, and then they use
Like
a
sand
sand
casting?
casting, and
Okay.
they press it into sand. You
For the
know,
for the listeners at home, sand casting is like, I mean, it's gotta be the first method of casting that
yeah,
anybody devised, right? Like, they used to make cannons this way, they used to
yeah,
make everything this way.
yep, and funny enough, so in Colonial Williamsburg, the foundry was the one that handled all of the casting.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah,
a foundry.
and so, but I mean, you're talking about silversmith, right? Like they do their own. Like we should be able to do our own casting. Like they pour their own ingots.
Oh,
So they have like we use the bellows. You're sitting there,
a
and oh my
bellows.
goodness, man, the bellows. I remember every single time we had to melt something, which wasn't often because the projects that they worked on typically took an extended period of time. But every time they had to melt something in that forge and do an actual ingot pour, and we're talking, an ingot that weighs 2 pounds. It's a big ingot in silver. They would, the whole entire shop would be smoked out, right? Because there was so much heat and air being pushed through the bellows and through the forge that the chimney couldn't handle all of it. And then, and you'd be sitting there just pumping the bellows up and down for probably 20 to 30 minutes. And so
Yeah.
your arms and shoulders would just be dead after you're done, like just worn out. And then you had to pick up, the melt, like the 2 pounds of molten silver, and like with your like noodle arms at this point, and try to like walk it over to the ingot, which was sitting in like a sand like bucket just in case there was overflow.
That's funny.
Yeah. And so, yeah, but it was a really cool experience. But the foundry would cast everything.
I don't know if I would have lasted as long as you did.
No,
Oh,
I mean, I wasn't there that long. Like it's like I feel like I was there from.
you were there 2 years, right?
Well, I was there for one
Not
summer.
full time. Not
Yeah,
full time.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was there for one summer, and then again from the beginning of summer through to I think it was when I started Blaine's course, which was March.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it was not quite a full year, like maybe 9 months.
That's a lot. That's a lot. The problem is that I grew up around jewelry.
Yeah.
And I grew up around people making jewelry,
Mhm.
like for production, from El Salvador. Like my father owned a jewelry store. I'm pretty sure that his father was a watchmaker.
Yeah.
So I've always been around that environment. And, just as a kid, like a 5-year-old kid, I'd sit, hang out and just pull watches apart. And the funny thing is, like in El Salvador, especially when, what was this, 1983, 1984? Digital watches came out,
Mhm.
and nobody wanted their old watches. Any kind of wind up watch, people would come in and literally trade them in for a Casio. So we had, like, one of my first watches was a Pepsi Rolex, which I immediately pulled apart.
Yeah.
Oh, my dad was upset. He was
Uh-huh.
irate. He was
Oh,
like,
it was
how
like-
could you? Because,
Yeah.
that's a lot of work trying to put this thing together. And I love pulling that little spring apart, like just watching it.
Because how old are you at this point?
I'm like 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why do you let me play with a Rolex?
Exactly. Yeah, that's on him. Like
That's kind of what I say. But no, just kind of being around it. And then when we emigrated here to the United States, he opened up a store in, he had one in DC for a little while, but it was mostly like a repair shop. And I just kind of hang out with him, take work in. You just kind of watch him do his thing. It wasn't until I was about 11 or 12 that he started to notice that I knew how to draw. Like I've always drawn, like since I could pick up a piece of paper and
Yeah.
a pencil, I've been drawing,
Yeah.
and I drew everything. And he was like, dude, you're actually kind of good at this.
Mhm.
Can you do some like a brooch or whatever? So I'm like, yeah. And me being a kid, the first thing I draw is the chupacabra.
Nice.
It was in the news. I don't know.
It was in the news?
Yeah.
All
Dude,
right.
Spanish news.
Wow. See, different culture
Yeah,
entirely.
seriously. And he was like really Spanish, man. Like he loved like Spanish radio. And they would always
Yeah.
make jokes about the chupacabra. So I was like,
Okay.
all right, this is cool. So I drew it and it ended up being more like a dragon. And the next thing, that developed into like, all right, that's fun. that's fun, son. But
Mhm.
if you're gonna carve all this wax, why don't you try to make like a ring?" So yeah, I started. I'm like, well, give me an idea. He gave me like a project, like an actual customer's project, and
Oh,
I accomplished it. He was blown away. He's like, this is gonna work.
oh,
You keep doing waxes, and so I would help him either with mold injections, wax
yeah.
cleanups, and I
This was not when you were 5.
no,
This
this
was when
is
you
all
were
when I
here
was like
now.
11 or
Yeah,
12.
yeah.
Yeah, then that's kind of what I grew up. And then by the time I was 13, I was doing most of his polishing. Then somewhere in there, my mom and him split up. So he ends up in Atlanta. She stays up here. So every summer I'm going down there. But my stepfather, Brian, he wanted to be a jeweler, which is like, what? So
Yeah.
he had a bench jewel, like a jeweler's bench at home. And he had saws, he had files, he had the whole setup, like a micro motor,
Yeah.
slightly better equipment than what my dad had,
Huh.
because he was more of a hobbyist.
Right.
And he's also the one that introduced me, like, hey man, like these are model cars and model planes.
Mhm.
No sooner had he introduced me to all that stuff that I started to make my own parts for these things. So now, like
Mhm.
me being me, I'm taking plastic whatever apart and making it into new parts for like mechs and
I
yeah,
see.
using his whole setup to do
Yeah,
this
yeah.
kind of stuff,
Yeah, so since he was a hobbyist, he had
Right. Exactly.
multiple different types of tools for different
Exactly.
media that you could
Yeah.
use. Yeah.
Yeah, so then I was like, "Well, maybe I wanna be an engineer," you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
And that was the thought, like, when I went to college, I didn't bother with it started with, "I'm gonna get an art degree,"
Mhm.
because I ended up working in the jewelry industry after, my wife and I got pregnant at 16.
Mhm.
By the time I'm 17, I needed to look for a job, or this is my thinking, so I
Yeah.
graduate a little bit earlier than I should have, and I walked into John Carlos's place like, "Hey, man, I need a job.
Yeah.
I'm about to be 18 and I don't wanna keep working for Taco Bell,"
Right, and you got
you
a
know?
kid
And I
and you
got a
got a
kid
family
and
to support
well,
and you know jewelry.
and I knew jewelry, exactly. So
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, I don't know, man. Like, why don't you come in and we'll do a bench test?" And that's usually the way that most jewelers get hired. Is like you come in, the owners have you sit down and they go, "Go ahead and size this ring, size this necklace, whatever, whatever."
Mhm.
And it's usually things that they can fix themselves. So if you do screw up, it's not a big deal. Um, but he started me with a quarter, and I cut this quarter, and I've been doing models and making my own little parts, right? That he was like, you might know your way around here. Why don't you try sizing this ring? So I sized the ring for him, and he's like, "Where'd you learn how to solder?" And I'm like, "Well, my dad's a jeweler,
Mhm.
And he's like,
Yeah.
"Go ahead and carve this wax for me." Not the perfect,
Sure.
wax, whatever, but he was like, "I think this might work."
Yeah.
And I told myself I wouldn't take on another apprentice, but let's give this a shot.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of how we got started. And initially, like I said, back then, no 3D printers.
Right.
And the little thing that we put together in order to do a little bit of cutting, uh, that was mostly for specialized projects.
Mhm.
Everything else was
Right.
hand fabricated or hand, casted, like carved,
Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah.
Uh, and he was a stickler for design. And I think that was like the best thing that could have
Mhm.
happened to me because um, for the first 3 months, I wasn't allowed to really do anything other than draw with straight lines only. This is homework. Like this is what I have to go home and do. So I go home and draw as many designs as I can, and occasionally we would use some of them. And then it was okay. Now only curved lines.
Hmm.
So for 3 months, I'm doing this, and then one of my first real apprentice projects was go ahead and make a 10 by 10 millimeter square that's 10 by 10 millimeters.
Right.
And we're using a micrometer in order to check the angles. And I'm doing this by hand,
Yeah.
and that square turned into a circle, turned into an oval, triangle, equilateral triangle,
Right.
all these shapes. And I'm thinking, dude, you're wasting my time. I'm trying to make jewelry,
Right.
and little did I know how valuable that was going to be later on.
Yeah.
And, like anything else, those 2D objects became 3D objects and it became a cube, a sphere. And there were no limitations on how you got this done.
Okay.
So I think what he was trying to do is teach me how to think outside of the box,
Mhm.
because like the washer project, my first attempt was to cut a circle and then try to file the inside and file the outside. And he's just
Right.
looking at me, kind of like laughing to himself. It's like, you could have just put a hole in the middle of that, strapped it onto some kind of lathe or
Yeah.
a turning apparatus and
Right.
been done with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you're right,
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is at 18,
Well, that's the thing too. Like, you're just like this is the point. Like 18 years old is probably the point
where
in
you're
this day and age where you're just starting out.
yes,
You know, because that's when you graduated high school.
right. But and his whole thing was like, you need to go to school.
Mhm.
And he kept pushing me to go to school. And I ignored him.
Yeah.
He always had my best interest in mind. In retrospect, like you were saying earlier, like looking back, you kind of see how people
Yeah.
affect your current situations and whatever. But like he always had my best interest in mind, which I appreciated. But regardless, if I told him I didn't want to go, I wanted to do this other thing, he would support that too. And I think it was right when I was like 20. He comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, Virginia, the jewelers, what is it called? Jewelers Association of Virginia is having a design contest."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Dude, I'm only 20." He's
Yeah.
like, "I think you can do it. So go ahead and order whatever materials you need, whatever design you want to do." And by this point, I'm already doing working with Matrix a little bit because
Mhm.
Matrix is old. It initially came out in 2000.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as it came out, he bought it. He sent me to Davenport to do the whole 2-week course in Matrix.
Okay.
3-week course or a month? Might have been a month.
Yeah.
I'm at Davenport in January, bro. That's like the worst time to be around there.
So cold.
We get out of the plane.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, the wind chill factor is negative 20 degrees outside. I'm like, oh my God. I wore all my pants. I was not ready. I showed up with a light jacket.
Oh no.
Because, here in the DC area,
Yeah.
January is like 50.
Yeah.
No,
It
more
can
like
be.
40,
Yeah.
30-ish.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for negative
No.
20 wind chill factor.
Yeah.
Everywhere we went, people came out with buckets of like water just from the tap. Why? Because you had to pour it over the side of your car to open your car.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, not a good time, but beautiful stuff. I love what I learned there.
Yeah.
So I come back, I design this thing, and I send it off to the review board. It's CAD.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're seeing.
Uh-huh.
They're like, yes, you're in. We go down to, I think the whole thing was held in Roanoke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a very strange place for like something to be centralized for the entire state, right? Like
Southern Jewelers. That's just where it was.
Yeah.
I from what I hear from it sometimes was held in all over, like Norfolk,
Sure.
Richmond. They always bounce around. It's never one
So the
city.
travels.
Yeah. So this one was in Blacksburg,
Okay.
So we went down there and we're like, oh, okay, this is cool. Now there was one jeweler. Can't remember his name right now, to be honest with you. But he swept the entire contest for design, for platinum pieces, for this, for that. And so everybody's like, yeah, that guy always wins. He's really good at what he does. Like, that's what he did.
Yeah.
So when they're calling my name for like, I think I did, what was it? It was business wear, because I made this palladium pearl ring where the outside was palladium. And I mean, that was thick. It was almost like, I want to say 8 or 7 millimeters wide, almost 4 millimeters thick at the top. And it was a squared shank with 18 karat accents going up the front and the back and shoulders.
Yeah.
Everything was pave set on the 18 karat yellow part. Rose gold flowers at the corners because it was a European shank. And I think 15 millimeter pearl in the center.
Wow.
Yeah. And I hand fabricated the whole thing. Like I melted the palladium, which everybody was like, you're not going to be able to melt it.
Yeah.
It melts just like platinum.
Yeah.
I hammered it out, from the very beginning, because again, even if I could cast it, it wasn't a guarantee that it would be a good casting.
Right.
Because nobody had really worked with palladium back then.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was there, everybody was like, "What's it made out of? Palladium? How'd you do it? How'd you get it to solder?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "We have a laser machine." Because again, I've been using. As soon as the laser came out,
Hmm.
John, being the techie that he was, he's
Yeah.
like, "We need a laser in the shop."
Yeah. Which again is one of those things, right? Like CAD programs,
Lasers.
lasers,
Oh
like all
yeah,
these
dude.
things were things that were not commonly found in workshops until like probably the mid 2000s.
If that,
Because I started in 2005. Like I was 15 in
there's
2005, and like they didn't even use palladium.
yeah,
Like at the jewelers at our shop were like, we don't deal with that stuff.
and I won a design with one. I mean,
Yeah,
I won an award with one,
absolutely.
which is so funny because like I was like 20 years old, and everybody's like, "Oh my god!" Like you know,
Yeah,
palladium. I'm like, I don't understand what the big deal is. It's
yeah,
gonna solder like anything else.
yeah.
That's how I always looked at materials.
Right.
If you can melt it, you can mold it.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I worked with him. That opened up a couple of opportunities for me because it was put into this publication called Southern Jeweler.
Mhm.
So they did a whole article.
Which we
You
still
know,
get.
we still get.
We get at our
There's still,
studio now.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So this one gentleman in DC, Paul Pastor, he's the owner of Shaw Schwartz and Sons, offered me my first like high end jewelry job. And at the time when I first met him, I was like 22,
Mhm.
21, maybe. Hubris of age and everything. You
Sure.
just go, yes, I'll build a shop with you, man.
Right.
No, I should have never done that.
Oh,
You know,
no.
I committed myself. We spent like high end jewelry equipment all the way through,
Yeah.
but I'm 21. I still have a lot to learn, but I don't see that. I'm thinking I'm hot. I'm like a hot shot or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things don't exactly work out for
Mhm.
us. We think we last about 2 years before he's like, "Hey, this isn't working out." Like,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like the level he was operating at and the level where I was at. Even though I had taken like 4 or 5 different classes at this point, won an award, but they sell high end jewelry there. You
Yeah.
know, he'd bring me things to repair from Rene Lalique.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
and hubris of age. Yeah, I know how to do the enameling, man. And
Mhm.
by miracle, I was able to like fix some of the uh what is that called? It's the
the
windows,
plique jour.
plicature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by a pure miracle.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh my,
yeah,
that makes me
yeah.
so nervous.
I got to work on things by Bucciolati, which
Wow.
is somebody that was introduced to me from working with John.
Yeah.
And this guy's bringing all this stuff in, and he's like, "Yeah, this person or somebody put all this lead solder. We need to clean it up and make it all gold again."
Yeah.
Again, bit off way more than I should have,
Oh,
but by some luck,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
was just luck.
Yeah.
A lot of these projects were carried out to the best of my abilities, and the client was very happy, and it matched the originals. So yeah, that's kind of been my experience. From there, I just kind of bounced around from one jewelry store to another because one thing I learned from him is that I don't know anything. You know,
Yeah.
so that's kind of like why I couldn't really stay at one place for too
Mhm.
long. I
It's
wanted
just
to
a
go.
humbling experience.
It really was.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really it put me in my place, for a long time after that. So anywhere that I went, I would always gravitate to the guy that knew the most, and I'm not I would teach them what I know and they would teach me what they knew,
Right.
and luckily I've always worked with people that have been fairly honest about their own skills.
Mhm.
So I'd be like, "How do I do that?" They were like, "This is how I do it. How do you do that?" And it was more of an exchange of information.
That's cool.
And that's kind of like,
Yeah.
but that's where Mr. Chu and John stick out the most, though, because almost everybody else was just kind of like there were people that aren't willing to learn to teach, which I really want to fix that with our YouTube channel.
Yeah. Right.
I want to make the entrance to the jewelry industry a little bit less.
Yeah.
I want to carry projects out the way we do things.
Right.
Because like the way you set up your engravings is
Mhm.
phenomenal. The way you engrave is phenomenal.
Thank you.
And the more that people see that from you setting it up in what is that called on the computer?
Oh, you mean like a light burn or talking about lasers? Or you're
Yes.
talking about
Yes,
Like
but
Illustrator.
also Illustrator.
Okay.
Starting
Yeah.
from Illustrator
Mhm.
to taking it into Lightburn,
Yeah.
or because you
Mm.
do a lot of hand engraving,
Yeah.
taking it into
Transfers.
printing it,
Yeah.
transferring it, putting it on the surface,
Right.
and then carrying out the procedures and how you sharpen your gravers and everything like that. So that, if there is people out there that want to see or get a better idea of how high-end jewelry is made, they'll have access to it. I
Yeah.
don't want to do it like, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of people on YouTube that make jewelry, but they'll start with a piece of stock. I want to start with grain.
Yeah.
I want to show you guys what it looks like to melt platinum.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, and that goes back to like what we're doing at the studio now.
Yeah.
Is everything that we start with starts, if it's gold, I should clarify. If it's gold, it starts with pure 24 karat gold.
Yeah.
And then you have your master alloy that you melt into it.
Right.
But that means that, we're able to work with whatever carat we want. We could do 1 carat if you really wanted to.
Whatever color you want.
But exactly, like the color variations, like it's just all on the table.
Right. So that's kind of what I had envisioned for our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
For this podcast, we spend a lot of time together. We talk about a lot of subjects.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that we came up with is this one about where the beers came from.
The beers.
And we've done a bunch of research on it. I think Bryce does a little bit more just because I'm so ADHD that I don't know how to sit down and just focus on one thing.
But to be fair to you, you're also doing all of the editing. You're doing, you're doing our CAD work as well, which to put it into perspective, Danny comes into the shop and he'll either start on the computer or you'll start at the bench. Right?
Yeah.
But like you're doing the CAD work and the design work. So even if I draw something on a napkin, I'm still handing it to you and you're still going to put it into making a 3D creation, right? On a digital creation that we're going to then send to the client, have them prove it.
Yep.
And then we're going to print it. And while we do everything in-house, we do everything in-house. So, it's like every single thing. So, we
do other jewelry stores in-house too.
Yeah, exactly. We're also part-time wholesale,
we are.
which pays the bills, which is, it's really cool. And we get very cool projects.
Oh yeah. I'm not complaining.
Because it's kind of neat, right? Like we get projects, I feel like, from certain jewelry stores that they don't necessarily trust their own people to do all the time.
Yeah.
Which it's also very humbling. But yeah, like, so that's why we wanted to do, a YouTube channel and we wanted to do a podcast to show people how things are actually done.
Carat Chronicles, everybody.
Carat Chronicles.
Follow us, subscribe, click on that, click on the, what is that called?
The bell.
Yeah. Thank you. The bell.
YouTube's bell.
Notifier.
Exactly.
Notifier?
Notifications.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's where we are. I mean, and just to, so what are we running at right now?
58 minutes or so.
Okay. It's about an hour.
Not that I'm counting.
Yeah, right. No, I was going to say, so just to finish up where we got started, I ended up leaving Williamsburg and going and taking a course through an actual technical school, who also you took a course through.
I did.
Which we found out later on.
I did.
And
Blaine Lewis.
Yeah, which you got him at the very beginning of his career.
I did.
Whereas I got him.
He's got an
more
interesting
recent.
story. I'd love to interview him on this podcast.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
I love Blaine. And he is just, he's a great instructor and especially when it comes to building your confidence as a jeweler.
Yes.
That was the one thing is, I remember every single project that we took on, he would always have something good to say, even if it was a harsh critique on your work.
Yeah.
So like you still left that day feeling like you had accomplished something.
Yeah, he did have a very silver tongue.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, this is great.
Yeah.
But it's still not very good.
Right, exactly. But that's the thing. He had the silver tongue, but he was no snake oil salesman, right? Like he had his own way of doing things and he would teach you those ways.
Right.
And he was also a very, like John Caro was, I feel like. Blaine was also kind of a front runner in terms of like the technology for instructing. He was the first guy that I saw that actually had a high zoom, high
Camera.
definition camera and a big
Right.
screen TV. So you could actually see, and he would put it over his shoulder so you could see exactly what he was working on.
How his hands were moving.
Exactly. And we're talking about like he got his camera, and this was in 2010. He got his camera like to the point where you could see the little burrs flying off as he was drilling something.
That's nice.
It was
That's funny, though.
it was amazing, right? Like,
And that's what we want to do.
exactly. And that, now we have the technology to do that, with bench cams, which is
so much fun.
so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went to Blaine's and took his 3-month like technical program.
Right.
And I had actually worked out a deal with the jewelry store that I had started out with when I was 15.
Yeah.
And they would pay for 2 months out of the 3 months of the program.
Nice.
Which at the time was probably 2 semesters of school.
Right.
So a full year of college tuition for this 3-month program. And so I was like, screw it. Yeah, like that's fine. So they said, if you do the equivalent, quote unquote, of an A or better, right, or a B or better or whatever in the courses, then we will bring you back as an apprentice. And basically what they did was they were like, you can pay off your loan. It was a loan.
Oh,
right?
nice.
So
Yeah.
they said, we'll loan you the money. You come back, you work as an apprentice for a year where you pay off the loan. They're still paying me a full salary, but they're taking out pre-tax
20%.
whatever percentage.
Yeah.
I think it was like maybe 8% or 7% or something like that.
That's not bad. That way
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt your pocket.
I didn't feel it,
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to have moved back in with family.
Yeah.
I moved in with my brother at that point, and he didn't make me pay rent, which was
That's pretty
amazing.
Nice. Yeah.
I just got a spare room in the basement or whatever. And yeah, I mean that's kind of where I went. Was I left college realizing that I just felt like I was just downtrodden. I felt defeated. Like I was like, I'm not going to get into this jewelry program ever. And even if I do, I wanted to take three semesters of it, but I'm going to take 2 at the most if I get in at the beginning of my senior year. And then, not to mention, I found out that the jewelry program, and this is pretty common for jewelry programs, I feel like across the country in terms of like university education, is a lot of the jewelry programs are sculptural and they're more free form art. They're not like classical jewelry, right? Like I wanted to learn pave. I wanted to learn prong setting.
That's not at all what you're going to be learning.
Exactly. I wanted to learn bead setting, but they were teaching
art,
soldering, brazing,
it's art,
big sculptural stuff. Yeah. And so, and a lot of bezels.
Yeah. I wish somebody would put that somewhere, because there isn't it's not practical jewelry.
Right.
It's not done with a purpose. It's just simply to be pretty.
Yeah. I mean, you're learning how to do things, but you're not learning how to do things on things that are going to be in the jewelry, like in the classical jewelry store.
Right.
So like you're learning soldering, you're learning stone setting, but it isn't really always applicable.
Right.
To working in the actual trade. If you want to become your own artist, have your own studio, your own art, great.
Can we take a break? I need to use the bathroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, hold on. All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. So I just I left college because I was like, I can take this jewelry course. And once again, my mom was the one that presented me with the brochure that I received when I was 18 and leaving to go to college. So
you could have saved yourself a lot of headache.
Oh, so much. I mean, I wouldn't have, met the friends that I've had along the way and all that stuff like that. Right. But I wouldn't have met my wife. But it was just one of those things where I was like, I had 2.5 to 3 years of loans now. University loans with no degree. And I needed to make money and I wanted to get into the jewelry industry and actually make things.
That's cool.
And so I came back.
And you're still friends with those guys, aren't you? The jewelry store owners.
Kurt? Yeah, Kurt and Rick.
Yeah, Kurt and Rick.
Yeah, those guys. And they own Aspen Jewelers in Herndon.
Great store, by the way.
Yeah.
Here in the area,
and it's just been. And I think they just celebrated their 30-year anniversary. For 25 years, something like that.
That's cool.
They've been there for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we do work for them occasionally, which is pretty cool.
To work for everybody.
Yeah, we do. We
So
do.
like the likelihood that you come to us, have us design something, and then take it to another jewelry store to have them make it is pretty high that we'll know about it. Like that's happened
Speaking
before.
from experience.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We designed something, went through the whole process, and then
This is hours of work.
hours of work. Yeah, we designed something, went through the whole process, and then I received a text from one of the retail stores that we work with, and they sent
Lo and
me,
behold,
they
this is my
sent,
drawing.
yeah, they sent me a screenshot of Danny's CAD and asked it like, how much to make this? And I had to let them know. I said, like that's our design.
Yeah.
Clearly this client is shopping around,
Which is fine.
Yeah, like you know what?
Yeah.
It's fine. But it's still one of those things like, hey,
pretty funny.
Like you see it and you're like,
yeah, initially, but at the same time, I'm like, oh well, it's
their prerogative.
Yeah.
It's their right. It's their right to shop around. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things where you're not going to win them all.
No. Nor do I expect to.
No, but yeah. So we met at Tiny Jewel Box just to finish our story. Because I went to Tiny Jewel Box after coming back to Aspen.
Yeah,
and I worked at Aspen for 5 years after I left.
That was my max. I worked any place longer than 5 years. You were lucky.
Yeah,
because by 3, I was getting squirrely. I was like, all right, time for me to move.
Time for me to move on. yeah. And so I'd only worked in Williamsburg.
Yeah,
and Aspen at that point.
Oh wow.
So I'd only worked in really 2 studios before moving to Tiny Jewel Box, where again they did everything completely different than the other 2 places. So yeah, it was a little
bit of a shock, huh?
Yeah, it's always a bit of a culture shock moving somewhere new.
Mm-hmm.
And with Tiny Jewel Box, it was we were essentially in a closet.
Yeah.
And we were on the 5th floor of the building, and we were just producing stuff, and we wouldn't really be on the sales floor at all. Whereas that's not really what you'd see in a small family-owned jewelry store.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So.
Yeah. So, I think we should end it right here.
Sure.
Tune in next week. Again, subscribe, follow us. Check out our YouTube, where we're going to have some of our projects coming up.
Yeah.
We're trying to record everything from start to finish, but it's difficult when your attention's being pulled every which way. Yeah. So we're doing the best we can. We're going to edit it really nicely. So yeah.
Again, and we have tight timelines. So
once again, my name is Daniel Gracias.
And I'm Bryce Dexter.
And this is Carat Chronicles. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.